Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And we're here to continue our breadcrumbs episodes dealing with the Tabernacle. And this is what, our fourth one, isn't it?
Well, we could talk for years and years and lifetimes.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, I think we're 3 or 4 in. And today we're going to be in the outer court.
Right. Now, what we've been doing so far is taking the parts of the tabernacle in the order they're presented in the Torah. And so the Torah begins its description of the Holy of Holies, and the two parts that were there were the Ark and the Ark cover. Mm-hmm. And then in our last episode, we moved into the Holy Place and described the two parts. There are actually 3. We'll get to the third one later on. But we described the table of showbread and the golden menorah. And then we're going to skip over chapter 26. We're going to keep going geographically rather than chronologically. Chapter 26 of Exodus describes the covers of the tabernacle, right, and the walls and all of that.
And every detail matters.
Yes, but we're going to move on to chapter 27. We'll come back to 26 later.
Okay.
But 27 describes the bronze altar out in the courtyard. So we want to talk about that and the laver.
You know how I feel this morning? Grant, do you remember that kids show that our kids watched a lot, and it was called The Magic School Bus? Remember that show?
No, I was working.
Oh, you missed it. So while I was home, we watched The Magic School Bus together, and the whole show was Ms. Frizzle, and she led this school bus of little kids on these wild adventures. And the thing about this Magic School Bus is it could go through time and space and visit the ancient pyramids in Egypt and the Great Wall of China, but then it could shrink down to like a little capsule and go inside your body and explore everything inside. Cool. So I feel like Miss Frizzle today, not because of my hair, no comments, please. Because when I think about this tabernacle model, it's become such a part of my mental furniture that it's a place I literally go to in my sacred imagination. And that, I think, is what we're trying to achieve as we discuss this, because there's an outside and an inside to all of these details.
And every detail matters.
Right.
So did Miss Frizzle drive the bus herself, or did
she did, and it was awesome.
So I can't be the bus driver then.
No, I'm afraid I'm in charge of that. So where am I going to take us first?
Well, let's start in Exodus chapter 27, and let's just read the description of the altar.
Sounds good.
Chapter 27 of Exodus, verse 1. You shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits in length, and 5 cubits in width. The altar shall be square, and 3 cubits its height. So it's 5 by 5 by 3 tall. Now keep that in mind, because those dimensions come up again later in the Bible.
Right.
You shall make its horns on its 4 corners. From it shall its horns be, and shall cover it with copper. Now altars would have horns on the 4 corners, because this is where you would tie the sacrifice. If you had a loop around its neck, and you could, like a leash, you could tie the leash to the horn of the altar so the sacrifice didn't wander off while you're laying hands on it and so on. You shall make its pots to clear its ashes, its shovels, its basins, its forks, and its fire pans. You should make all its vessels of copper. Now, the word for copper here is the word nachashet. And it means copper, or it could be bronze or brass, which are alloys of copper. So whatever your translation says, it's fine. Verse 4, you shall make for it a netting of copper meshwork, and make upon the meshwork 4 copper rings at its 4 edges. You shall place it under the surrounding border of the altar from below, and the meshwork shall go to the midpoint of the altar. You shall make staves for the altar, staves of acacia wood, and you shall plate them with copper. Its staves shall be brought into the rings, and staves shall be on 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Hollow of boards. Luchot is the word there in Hebrew. And that's a word we've seen before in Exodus. We'll come back to that. Hollow of Luchot, boards shall you make it. As you were shown on the mountain, so shall they do. Now, all this talk about meshwork and so on, every commentator has their ideas about how
Yeah.
to translate that, what that means. But apparently it means that there is a way for air to come in through the side of the sides of the altar so that the fire would burn extremely hot. And it would consume the sacrifices completely, except for ash that was left over. But exactly how this looked and so on, it's kind of difficult to figure out. So that is the bronze altar.
Now that's the up close view, but if we telescope out and look down
Yes.
from the sky, we'll see that this was the outermost part, considered the outer court section
Right.
of this structure. But it isn't considered the actual tabernacle, correct?
Right. The tabernacle was the building that was surrounded by the outer court.
Right.
And the tabernacle itself was made up of these, which we skipped that chapter, chapter 26, but it was made out of these very heavy beams, solid beams covered with gold.
And that was the holy place.
Yes, and the Holy
which
of
led
Holies.
into the Holy of Holies.
Right.
And we've made mention of the fact that this is like the inner core of where the priest would go and do the work, the important work. And it's a reflection of that inner part of us, the soul, and
Yes.
then deeper into the actual spirit
Right,
where
right.
we encounter God.
Yeah. The tabernacle, as we mentioned in our introductory discussion, is a picture of Yeshua. But Yeshua is the model for what we are supposed to be. So we should see him in the details of the tabernacle, but we need to also see ourselves.
And we also made mention that when the tabernacle is mentioned, God says, I want to be within
Yeah.
and
Bitokam,
Among.
within them or among them.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So the outer court is like a picture of our bodies.
That's where I was going.
The holy place,
Yes.
that is our souls. We are souls. That's what we have. That's what we are. We don't have a soul, we are a soul. And then the Holy of Holies is our spirit. And we mentioned last time, I think, that the holy place was the part that had two doors. You could go in further into the Holy of Holies, or you could go out to the outer court.
So when you're in this outer court, you have entered from a bigger space, which is the wilderness.
Yes.
You've approached this structure and you've chosen to enter in. And the very first piece of furniture that you will encounter is what you just described to us.
The altar.
Right.
Yes.
So, Grant, what in the world is this teaching us about our journey
Yeah.
through the wilderness and then toward God?
Yeah. Well, when we think of the altar, what we normally picture in our minds is dead animals being burned.
Yeah, it just feels,
It feels kind of primitive and kind of gross and everything.
yeah.
But the
Obsolete, for sure.
Obsolete. But one of the things we have to realize is that the sacrifices were eaten. And if you want to eat meat, you have to cook it. You're not
Yeah.
allowed to eat it raw.
Right.
And
Which the pagans must have done.
Oh yes, they did absolutely.
And that's why we're warned as his
And still
people,
do in
don't
places.
imitate the pagans
Yeah.
like that. Right.
No, it's to be cooked, and so it would be put on the altar. The parts that would go up to God were burned completely on the altar. Then part of the sacrifice would be given to the priest who officiated. The rest of it belonged to the one who brought the animal, and he could eat it along with his family, and it was a time of great rejoicing.
Right.
Now, the altar not only is a picture of death, but it's also a picture of life, because the life of this animal now becomes absorbed into the very physical life of the person who brings it.
That's fascinating.
It brings strength. It brings
Yeah,
life to the
yeah.
person.
But what kind of attitude is necessary for a person's sacrifice to be considered truly, truly holy?
Well, one of the things, too, another misconception of the sacrifices is that they all had to do with sin. They did not have to do with sin. Now, there was a sin offering and a guilt offering, which had to do with repentance from sin. But the whole burnt offering, the peace offering, the thanksgiving offerings, these were all voluntary. And you brought them simply because you loved God. You wanted to express gratitude to him. You wanted to draw closer to him. The whole burnt offering is called a korban, from the word karav, which means to draw close. And that's where we get our word carbon, because it was burnt completely. But when you think of the altar, think of it this way.
Okay.
It's a spiritual elevator system.
That makes sense.
What goes on the altar goes up.
The part that's supposed to go up.
Yes. The skin never went on the altar.
Mm-hmm.
Every sacrifice was skinned. What was inside the hide went on the altar, and it went up. And there's a powerful, powerful picture here. Because Paul in Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable unto God. So as living sacrifices, we have to go back to the Torah. And how was the sacrifice done? The skin was left behind. What was inside the hide was given to God.
Right.
So to be a living sacrifice, I give God everything inside my hide. I give him my soul, my mind, my future.
The
my
invisible
health.
part.
All the invisible parts
Yes.
of him, I give to him.
Right.
But Leviticus chapter 7 tells us that the hide now belongs to the priest who officiated at the altar.
And what would the priest do with that?
He would use it to make Torah scrolls and mezuzah scrolls, tefillin scrolls. He used it to record God's word.
So in other words, when we truly encounter him and we allow him to, well, I guess what we do, Grant, help me with this. We surrender the
Who we
internal part, who we are. We lay
Our
that
souls.
down and we just tell God, I trust you with me.
Yes.
I trust you with me. That will translate into the flesh part of our life, the physical part of our life, being a reflection and a living testimony.
Yeah,
We will
a
have
living
his word
epistle.
written upon us. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, we proclaim his word through our deeds and
Yeah.
our words, our
Yeah,
actions. Our
yeah.
body should proclaim his word because our body should be conforming to his commandments.
The thing that fascinates me about all of this, well, there are many things that fascinate me about all of this, is that we can't go any further or any closer or even approach the Holy of Holies until we deal with self.
Right.
That
We
is the
just can't.
very first item of business
That's right.
when we enter this court.
That's right. We have to, first of all, give ourselves to God. He gave, through Yeshua, God gave himself to us. And Yeshua is interested in calling a bride. He wants a bride. He looks for someone who's going to love him back the way he has loved us, who's going to give herself to him. And to become a living sacrifice is saying, Lord, I'm not my own. I've been bought with a price. So I'm going to give to you fully what you've redeemed, what you've purchased. Because you gave yourself fully for me. I want to give myself fully for you.
Here's where the problem comes in, because there's a lie and a misconception that if I lay down my true self and I surrender it to what God wants, I'm going to lose out on something.
Well, that I know that's the lie. It is
That
a lie.
is the lie. And
Because-
there's such a fear that he's
Yeah.
going to give us less than our best version of our life.
Which provides a basic misunderstanding of who God is.
Exactly.
There's no one on earth or outside of this earth who loves us as passionately as much as God does. He loves us so much, he gave his only begotten son.
And the whole purpose of this structure, this tabernacle, and all of these details is he wants to bridge the gap.
He does. And so to give yourself fully to God is the best thing you could ever do for yourself.
But
Because he
here's-
has your best interest at heart all the time.
But here's the other thing. That isn't where it ends. That's the beginning of the journey
That's
through the
the beginning.
tabernacle.
Yes.
There's much, much, much more to come. And it's a lifetime.
Yes.
It's an eternity, really.
But if you want to enter into the tabernacle spiritually, you got to leave the ego and the fleshliness behind. The altar is a symbol of the cross. Mm-hmm. And who died on the cross? Yeshua did. He died
Right.
for us. He gave himself fully for us.
Yeah.
But then what does he say? He says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. That's a living sacrifice.
That's
So
not
the-
a popular gospel message, is it?
No, but it's great news.
It's freedom. Because when we can be delivered from what we think is best for ourselves,
right.
we can truly begin to achieve a closer intimacy
Absolutely.
with our source, with our creator.
And this is pictured. That first verse, I said, pay attention to these dimensions, because it tells us that the altar was 5 cubits in length, 5 cubits in width, and it was 3 cubits in height. Now, what other piece of furniture had those dimensions? Well, if we go over to 2 Chronicles chapter 6, which describes the dedication of Solomon's temple. The temple is complete, and it comes to the day of dedication. And in verses 12 and 13, this is what it says. Then Solomon stood before the altar of Adonai in the presence of all the assembly of Israel and spread out his hands. Solomon had made a bronze platform, ready for this, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high.
So what was he saying?
And, well, let's finish the verse. And had set it in the court, and he stood on it. Then he knelt on his knees. He's on this platform in the presence of all the assembly of Israel and spread out his hands toward heaven and then prays this most incredible prayer. What's he doing?
That's real worship.
Yes, that's real worship. Worship means to give yourself as a sacrifice. So it's Solomon saying, I want to be a living sacrifice. And he makes a platform the size of the altar in the tabernacle, gets on it, kneels on it, puts his hands up to heaven, and when he dedicates that temple to God's service, he's dedicating himself.
Right.
He's being a living sacrifice.
It's amazing.
Now, one other little thing, little detail, easy to miss. I mentioned that the Hebrew word for boards in verse 8, you make it hollow of luchot. The first place we find that word luchot is when Moses goes up on top of Mount Sinai, where he's at now as this is being written. He's getting these instructions.
Right.
God gave him 2 stone luchot.
Oh, wow.
With the 10 Commandments on them. So what is our altar made of?
His
It's
word.
made of God's commandments.
Right.
We quit doing things our way, doing what's right in our own eyes. We say, Lord, I want to follow your commandments. I want to do things your way. That is how we become a living sacrifice.
There's a verse that I have loved for years. It's in Isaiah 57, and it's verse 15, roundabout there. And it just reminds me that he can sometimes seem so distant and untouchable, but he has made a way for us to know him because that's his heart. And here's the secret. And that's what this tabernacle structure is all about. For thus says the Lord, high and exalted one, who lives forever, whose name is holy. I dwell on a high and holy place, but I also dwell with the contrite and lowly of spirit. Why? In order to revive the heart of the contrite. Isn't that amazing?
That's beautiful.
He
That
wants
is
to
wonderful.
revive us and breathe life into us. But we have to come to him and approach this altar and say, I trust you. Yeah.
That is really, really amazing.
So if we go a little bit further out and look down at the whole structure again, I like to remember several things about this tabernacle structure, Grant. I think about my own journey and how I decided at one point to leave the wilderness or just the world. And I see this place that I'm invited to, and I know that inside this place, spiritual things happen, and it's set apart from the rest of the way the world works. So I enter into this outer court. This outer court is pretty busy.
It is.
It's crowded. There are a lot of people there, and it's a mixed multitude. There's
a
lot of things going on. There's noise, there's activity, there's movement.
There's animals.
There's a lot going on. And some people never leave this space because they like to sort of be lost in the crowd of people that say, I'm going to be part of God's people.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go and do God business.
Yeah, and this is only part of the tabernacle structure where there are spectators.
There are spectators, and that's where I'm going with this, because When I decide to approach that altar, it has to be me deciding to approach this altar.
Yes.
And there can be some motives that aren't going to accomplish what the altar is meant to do.
That's right.
If I'm worried about the spectators watching me and judging me for being this or that, I might avoid approaching the altar. But on the other hand, if I approach the altar in order to draw the attention of the spectators and say, look at me, look, I'm going to go and I'm going to lay my life
Yes.
down, and you trying to draw attention, that isn't laying down your ego.
No,
That is coming from the ego.
that's right.
And that isn't what the altar is meant for.
And by the same token, if you want to give your life fully to God, it's not something you can just do privately. It's
Yeah.
something that is a public thing. It's not that you stand on a street corner, I'm giving my life to God. But what it means is, if you've given your life to God, publicly, it's going to be
Noticed.
on display.
It'll be noticed.
Absolutely. You have to get to the place, I don't care what people think.
Right.
I am going to give myself to the Lord and live the life His way.
And the thing that we've noticed through the years is that as you then move further in, and we're going to get to the laver and the role it plays in our life, but then we move into the section of the soul where we talked about last time, where we eat the word and His
Yes.
light, and there's breaking, and there's all that soul work that happens. It's very much quieter, and it's less crowded,
Yes.
and it's much
No
more
spectators there.
private. It definitely is. And then, of course, the Holy of Holies, as we've mentioned, it's just me and Him. It's a one-on-one.
Yes, exactly.
So all this to say, don't be surprised when an authentic spiritual journey takes you further away from a crowd or a herd of people who think the same or are very busy.
Yeah.
There's a saying that I love, that as spirituality increases, activity decreases.
Yeah.
It gets more personal, it gets more private, it gets
That's
more
right.
quiet. It just becomes more about approaching Him
Yes.
one-on-one. That's very important,
I know.
because we think
Yes.
something's wrong with us
Yeah.
when we find ourselves less busy. One of the things you keep saying to me over and over, and I love it, over the last year, at one point we looked at each other and we said, look, no more striving. We want our life to be free
Yes,
of strife.
right.
And the further you go into the tabernacle of the soul, there's less noise and there's less striving, isn't there? Now,
Yes.
it doesn't mean you're not doing work, but we can be busy.
There's peace.
There's
and- yes.
peace. We
No
do
wasted
work
emotion.
without the anxiety and the
Right.
striving and the fussing. And am I making sense? It's
Yeah,
hard
me
to
it
put
is.
into words.
Yes, but there's less wasted motion.
There is.
And it's a life where everything you do, it bears fruit. It just matters because you're not wasting your energies, your resources on things that are just the turmoil and the anxiety of your own emotions and own soul.
That's why it's so important that this altar experience, which isn't a once and done, there's one main time that starts our journey, but we return to this altar
right.
over
That's
and
right.
over and over.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. The sacrifices
Oh,
and the
yes.
altar was a part of their daily life.
You take up your cross daily and follow Him.
But
don't
the
you?
self that I put on that altar, Grant, has to be the true self. Otherwise, we're just laying down a phantom soul
Yeah.
or an ego. Like I was just reading in Proverbs 7 this morning. Remember the picture of the harlot, the woman of folly, who meets the young, foolish man
Yeah, to seduce Him.
to seduce him. And what did she say she just finished doing?
Oh, I brought my sacrifices.
I just came from
Yeah.
laying down my sacrifices.
Yes.
I made a peace offering.
I'm religious.
I'm religious. So she entered into that outer court and she went through the motions so that she could then go back out
Yes.
and tell herself that she was free to
Yep.
pursue her own way.
And Proverbs also says that a person who brings his sacrifices in pride and in showiness without a sincere heart is an abomination to God.
Well, that goes back to that contrite spirit
Yes.
that is described in Isaiah, doesn't it?
Well, more and more in conversations between you and me and with other people, and even some of the teachings I've done, I talked about how there are two kinds of people. There are religious people and there are spiritual people.
Yeah.
The religious people love the outer court, where there's all this hoopla
And they're
activity and noise.
loud.
Yeah.
The woman described in Proverbs 7 is boisterous,
Yes.
and she's kind of obnoxious, and she's not quiet. She's not reflective. She's not serious.
It's a lot of look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the spiritual person, they want the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
They want that intimacy with God. Well, we need to move on.
I
Our
know. We
time's
haven't even
gone.
gotten to the main
We
stuff
gotta
yet.
Get to the
All right.
Well, that's main stuff.
Is
we're
it
talking
good?
about. Yeah.
Good.
All right, Mrs. Frizzle.
All right.
Let's move right on.
Oh, boy.
We're going to skip on over to chapter 30,
Mm-hmm.
which is the other piece of furniture in the outer court.
This is so interesting.
Fascinating stuff. So we're in chapter 30, verse 17. This is what it says. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, You shall make a copper laver at its base of copper for washing. Place it between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water there. From it Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands together with their feet, hands and feet. Whenever they come to the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water and not die.
So they cleanse going in.
Or when they approach the altar to serve, to raise up and smoke a fire offering to Adonai.
Okay.
So when they're coming out and they're going to the altar to do what needs to be done there, they shall wash their hands and feet and not die. It shall be for them an eternal decree, for him and his offspring for their generations. So on this x-axis, from the entrance of the courtyard, you come to the altar, then you come to the laver, then you come to the entrance to the holy place.
What does this laver tell us about our journey?
Well, after the Israelites offered the Passover lamb, which was a sacrifice without an altar there, but the lamb's blood is put on the door, they ate the body of the lamb, and then the next morning they left. What was the next encounter? The Red Sea.
It's like a mikvah.
It's a place where you completely separate from the one who controlled your life before.
Yeah.
And now you're in the wilderness with the one you're giving your life to now. The Red Sea was a place where Pharaoh no longer could come get me, and I could no longer go back to him.
Right.
It was a way of washing away and cleansing from the entire past.
It was like an immersion.
Yeah, exactly. So the altar is where I give myself to God. The laver is like where I wash away all the residue of my past.
So here's a loaded question.
Yeah.
What was the laver made from?
Well, that information is given to us over in later on in chapter 38, I believe it is.
This detail is really, really cool.
Chapter 38. Yeah, you have this little bit of information that's so important, but
Buried.
if you don't keep reading, you don't get it.
Yeah.
So in chapter 38 of Exodus, verse 8 says, He made the laver of copper at its base of copper from the mirrors of the legions who massed at the I can't read, my glasses need clean. Massed at the entrance of the tent of meeting.
So that word legions is feminine.
It's a feminine word. It's the legions of women. Men didn't use mirrors really back then. It's kind of like back in the 60s. I don't think anybody used mirrors back then either. But the women had mirrors, which were polished pieces of copper. They didn't have the reflective glass, the silvered glass like we have today. But they would polish up a piece of copper, put a handle on it, and polish it up. They could get a pretty good reflection of themselves. So the women brought their mirrors.
Does this picture the women of the group of followers laying down their vanity?
Yes.
Sort of thing?
Exactly. And what's so fascinating about this, there's several things, is that when the teruma was collected, when God said, bring the teruma, bring skins and hides and wood and precious stones and gold and silver and copper, and bring all these things. He didn't say what each one was going to be used for. But here, these women brought all these mirrors, and it's like Moses said, we're going to make the laver just out of these mirrors that the women brought.
That's so cool.
And the laver is the one thing that doesn't have any dimensions attached to it.
It just was as big as
The more mirrors,
the bigger the laver. Wow.
So it could be as big as depending on how many mirrors are brought.
Wow.
And so what's interesting, if you look in the mirror, you see your face. But if you look down into the laver, you could also see your face, but you'd see the heavenlies as well.
It's
you
in the
saw
context
yourself in the
of
context of the heavens.
The heavens. That's so
Yes.
cool. You know what I am thinking too? It just popped in my head. If we're willing to lay down our vanity and look down and see a bigger context and allow the eternal truth to be the background, the next thing that we're going to encounter in our journey through the tabernacle is the curtain that takes us into the holy place, and the walls
Are covered with gold.
are covered with gold, so you get your
Yes.
reflection, but it's going to be a truer one.
Yes. It's all, the picture I get is this. I'm going to lay down my mirror, which is just telling me what my face looks like.
Yeah, and I
It's
hold
for a
it,
vanity.
and it's on my
Yes.
terms, right?
But when you go into the holy place and
You
then
see
in the Holy of Holies,
yourself.
you see yourself,
Your
the
true
whole you,
self.
all of you.
Oh, it's so amazing, isn't it?
So it's like I have a better way to see who I am.
That is amazing.
And in James, it talks about those who read the Torah but don't follow it. It's like a person who looks into a mirror and then he walks away and forgets what he saw.
Right.
And so the Torah is the way we enter into the holy place, because the Torah will reflect back to us, here's what you look like, and here's what you should look like.
Well,
and here's how you get there.
I asked you the other night, why in the world did the priest use the laver and wash his hands and feet going in to the tabernacle and then coming back out? What's the point of him washing coming out and when he's entering back into the courtyard and doing the business among the people?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I'm not sure I have the best answer, but this is what I've got right now. It's obvious why you need to wash when you're going from the altar in the holy place, because you're going to have animal hair.
You're going to
and
have
blood.
the world's dirt on you.
Yes, you're
Yes.
just going to have that. So
Yes.
you wash your hands and your feet, because the altar is not a clean place. And so if you're going into the holy place, you need to cleanse. But why would you need to wash coming out of the holy place? Because you're not going to get dirty in there, but you wash your hands and feet again. The only thing I can think of is refreshing.
I think that's true.
Refreshing.
You're
how
refreshed.
refreshing when
Yes.
you wash your hands,
Yes.
you wash your feet. And remember, there's no floor in the tabernacle. Whether you're in the outer court or in the Holy of Holies, you're just walking barefoot on the dirt.
Well, that makes sense, because if we go back to an immersion and a mikvah, those things happen. You're
Over and over.
again. You're sort of cleansed and you're refreshed
Yes.
all at the same time. Wow. So moving right along, we were discussing the material of the laver together the other day, and then we started to compare it with the material of the cover of the altar, which we just discussed a few
Yeah.
minutes ago. I never knew this, and this was news to me, which I think other people might find interesting as well.
Well, over in the book of Numbers, in chapter 16, we read about Korah's rebellion. Korah was a Levite, and he decided that why should Moses and Aaron get all the publicity? We're Levites too, and we want to serve at the altar and in the holy place and Holy of Holies. And so Korah was just very full of himself, and he got 250 men to follow him in this rebellion.
It's such
It
a
was horrible thing.
sobering story.
Well, you can read the whole story in chapter 16. What God told Moses to do is have Korah and his men get their censers, their copper,
Like fire
censers.
pans, right?
Fire pans.
Okay.
Yeah, not censers, but fire pans. Fire pans were used to keep hot coals on.
Yes,
so
to
you could
carry
have
it from one
fires.
place to
Yeah.
another. Okay.
You didn't have matches and lighters back then, so you had fire pans. And he said, bring them and put incense on them, and God will reveal whose are his. And so, as you know, the ground opened up, swallowed up Korah and his family, and then God sent a plague. He sent fire out. It's in the end of chapter 16, verse 33.
God was not pleased.
Yeah. In verse 35, a flame came forth from Adonai, consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. So that didn't turn out well for them. But then here's the interesting thing. God tells Levi, or Moses tells Levi, Aaron, to collect the fire pans. And that is in verse 3. As for the fire pans of these sinners against their souls, they shall make them hammered out sheets as a covering for the altar.
So hold on. When we were talking about the laver, the women
Brought
offered
their mirrors.
mirrors. So now we move back to the altar, and this cover is made from
The fire pans
pans
of these rebellious men.
men.
Yeah.
What a contrast.
And and the cover was not something that was necessary for the altar, but as though the men were sinners against their souls, as they're described, there's nothing wrong with their fire pans.
Well, I'll tell you what, it also reminds me that our rebellion is going to be a barrier. It's going to cover over my ability to connect and to reach the altar where I need to go.
And you know, when I think about these 250 men in Korah, it's like here are men who are sinners against their own souls. They're rebels. They're
And they
aligned with
knew,
Satan.
they knew what
Yeah.
God had spoken.
But here's the thing, it's so amazing. But the fire pans and the incense were holy things.
Yes, yes.
So even scoundrels
Right.
can handle holy things.
That's
And God
so,
will still use the holy things in their lives that they produce for his good, even though the people themselves were wicked. That's who our God is. It is for a human being can't discern the difference between the two. It's very difficult for us, but God does. So the fire pans became something permanent that was used when the tabernacle would travel.
it's just interesting.
Yeah.
And the other thing that comes to my mind is there's fire and there's water out here represented.
And the fire pans were, which became the cover. The
God's
cover
fire, yeah.
was of use when the tabernacle was broken down and moving. But when it was set up, the cover is put aside. But the laver went into use when it was
Right.
at rest.
Right.
There's so many contrasts between the laver and this cover. One was round, one was square. One's provided by women voluntarily. The one was involuntarily taken from the men who were rebels. One was used to cover the altar where the fire is put. The other was used for the water, as you mentioned. That was for cleansing and refreshing. There are so many things going on between these two.
Real quick, too, it just occurred to me, this water in this laver, am I correct? Was that the water where the Sota was tested to see if she was guilty or innocent?
Yes, it was the first incidence of sota water.
Oh, no. That's bad.
Sorry, Ms. Frizzle.
Okay, let's return to serious.
Yes, we read about the sota. I believe it is in the book of Numbers. I should know this. If it's not Leviticus, it's in Numbers. The woman who's accused of adultery by her
Right.
husband.
Yes.
So there was a test.
Yes.
And
yes.
there'd be this curse written out on a piece of parchment, and in it, God's name is mentioned twice, written out.
And then it was scraped off.
It is scraped off into water,
That water that came out of this laver.
Yes.
And then she drinks
and she
it.
had to drink it.
So
and if she
weird.
was innocent, nothing would happen to her. In fact, she would bear children. But if she was guilty, she would shrivel up and would be unable to bear children, and she'd be an outcast, and she would die.
I've always thought it's a precious thing that God allows his name to be erased or scratched off only in this
To
instance
save a marriage.
because it preserves
A marriage.
the intimacy of marriage. Wow, so much.
So much
layers
going
and
on.
layers and
Layers
layers.
and layers.
Like you said last night when we were chatting, you said it's like onions, and you peel off a layer, and there's another layer, and another
yeah.
layer, and another layer.
Oh, so true. The sotah is going to be found in the book of Numbers.
Yeah.
And it's around chapter 5.
Right. So, Grant, as we're sitting here discussing the physical reality of the tabernacle in its time, and then the spiritual reality here and now in our time, I think of David because he spoke often about entering God's house and dwelling there and how he wanted to remain there at all times. Psalm 26, he extols the beauty of just dwelling in God's house. That's where God wants us to come with all of this.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
And I'm also thinking of the psalm that who can approach the house of God, who can the hill of the Lord, and so on. He who has clean hands and a pure heart.
And a pure heart.
The pure heart is a result of giving myself as a living sacrifice at the altar.
Right.
The clean hands is me laying down my ego and being purified at the laver.
Okay, that's really, really amazing.
Yeah. So
I think that's a
is that a good place to
perfect
close?
wrap up. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, let's slow this bus down and park it. And
Well,
everybody's going to be talking about Ms.
I know,
Frizzle.
and I'll end this discussion with her famous quote every episode of the Magic School Bus. I'm not going to try to imitate her. Lily Tomlin did it better. But she would say, take chances, make mistakes, and get messy to all the children. In other words, don't hold back. Live life and go for it.
Engage life.
Engage life. And spirituality and growth can be a little messy at times. Don't worry about it.
But we're to choose life.
We are.
Yes.
We are.
That is so true. All right. Well, this was fun. We went over time. People say these were too short.
All right, then.
We went over 15 minutes this time.
15 minutes. Wow.
15 minutes. So anyways, till next time, we wish you shalom and may God bless.
Shalom, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.